So it looks like we are on time to begin our open session for the Committee on Non-Human Primate Model Systems, State of the Science and Future Needs. I'd like to welcome everyone, including our audience listening in on the webcast. I am Ken Remus from Texas A&M University and chair of the committee. Of course, we'd like to thank NIH and its representatives for sponsoring this study and for taking the time to speak with us at this time, certainly a critical time since we're now getting started with the charge. Note that this meeting is, of course, being recorded and transcribed, and that this recording will be posted on the project website over the next couple of weeks in case you want to revisit the contents of any of these discussion. I now would like to ask Andy Pope from the Health Sciences Policy Board to introduce himself and make up any remarks he wants to share with us. Andy?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ken. I want to say on behalf of the National Academies, welcome to the webinar participants to this first meeting of our new committee on state of the science and future needs for non-human primate model systems. We're excited to get started here today. I wanted to just remind everyone that the National Academy of Sciences was established actually by Congress in 1863 to serve as an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit advisor to the federal government on matters of science and technology. And this study, in fact, is being done in response to a congressional mandate that came to us through NIH. And we are very fortunate today to have the director of the Office of Science Policy at NIH, Dr. Lyric Jorgensen, to present the charge to us today. And I don't need to say anything more than that, I don't think, other than to say welcome to Lyric. Thank you very much for coming to be with us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Andy. I am really excited to be here with you all today. I am grateful that you all have agreed to take on this charge, and I'm thankful to the committee who are volunteering their time to go ahead and take on this important effort. So I'm going to share some slides to walk through some of the impetus for this tasking and what we're hoping to get out of this study.
Lyric, would it be all right if I read a disclaimer for public sessions before?
Absolutely. Please do.
Thank you so much. This is perhaps protocol, but I think something that is important, I think, for the sake of clarity of understanding on the part of those participating in the meeting. So please bear with me as I read this lengthy disclaimer, and then we'll do a very quick round of introductions of the committee so that, Lyric, you have an idea of who you're addressing. Then we'll go back to you. So thank you for that. As chair of the Committee of the State of the Science and Future Needs for Non-Human Primate Model Systems, I'd like to welcome everyone to the open session of the committee's first meeting. I want to know that this is an open, on-the-record information gathering session. That is, the committee is in the process of assembling materials that it will examine and discuss in the course of making its findings and conclusions. Therefore, I ask everyone here today to be extremely mindful of the fact that the committee has made no conclusions and that it would be a mistake for anyone to leave here today thinking otherwise. Comments made by individuals, including members of the committee, should not be interpreted as positions of the committee or of the academies. This is the first of several planned committee meetings. Some of these meetings will include public sessions, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from many experts in the field and receive public testimony. The committee will deliberate thoroughly before writing its draft report. Moreover, once a draft report is written, it must go through a rigorous review by experts who are anonymous to the committee, and the committee then must respond to this review with appropriate revisions that adequately satisfy the Academy's Report Review Committee and the chair of the National Research Council before it is considered an NRC report. The report is expected to be publicly released in early 2023. Further information on the study, including future public meetings, can be found on the project website. The committee has been asked to conduct a landscape analysis and develop a report describing its findings and conclusions regarding the state of the science on non-human primate model systems, including their current role in biomedical research funded by the National Institutes of Health and future needs opportunities to improve human health and challenges for NIH-supported biomedical research involving non-human primates. The committee will also examine new approach methodologies such as in vitro methods and computational approaches, including the development status of these methodologies and ways to increase collaboration between NIH-supported researchers who use non-human primates and those who use new approach methodologies. The open session today provides an opportunity for NIH, the sponsor of this study, to address the committee and describe the context and reasoning that went into the committee's statement of task, so that we can better understand the scope and purpose of this study. During the discussion that follows, the committee questions and comments will take priority. Following the presentation and discussion of the committee's charge, we will have an opportunity to consider questions and comments from members of the public audience, which can be submitted in written form at any time during today's open session during the webinar's question and answer session. Please be aware that comments and questions directed to the committee will be included in the public access file for this study and could be used in the development of the committee's report. Feedback on the study may also be submitted through the project's public website. I would now go ahead and ask the committee members to introduce themselves, and I'll call on them for a very brief round of introductions, just your name and title and affiliation. And we'll begin with Chris Abbey. Chris?
Good morning. I'm an emeritus professor from the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. I have worked with non-human primates for much of my career, doing research on new drug development, as well as asking basic biomedical questions.
Chris?
I've served as a director of multiple primate resources in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Let's try just give the name and affiliation, please. Stefan Barron.
Chief Scientific Officer at Verisim Life. Thanks.
Thank you. Eliza Bliss-Morau.
My name is Eliza Bliss-Morau. I'm an associate professor of psychology and a core scientist at the California National Primate Research Center, both of which are located at UC Davis.
Thank you. Ricardo Carrion.
Ricardo Carrion Jr., Professor and Director of Maximum Attainment Contract Research at Texas Biomedical Research Institute.
Thank you. Mark Klein.
Hi, Mark Klein, Professor of Pathology, Comparative Medicine, and Radiation Oncology at Wake Forest School of Medicine.
Myrtle Davis.
Myrtle Davis, Vice President of Discovery Toxicology, Bristol Myers Squibb Biopharma.
Ashley Faslibas.
I'm Ozgi Fazlabas. I'm Professor of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Biology at Michigan State University.
Melanie Graham.
I'm Melanie Graham, Associate Professor of Surgery in the Medical School and Associate Professor of Population Medicine in the College of Vet Medicine at the University of Minnesota.
Kelly Metcalf.
Kelly Metcalf-Pate, Director of the Division of Comparative Medicine and Associate Professor of Biological Engineering, MIT.
Guoli Meng.
Guoli Meng, Professor of Neuroscience and Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania.
John Quackenbush.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Quackenbush. I'm Professor and Chair in the Department of Biostatistics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in Boston.
Peter Strick.
Hi, I'm Peter Strick. I'm Professor and Chair of the Department of Neurobiology and Scientific Director of the Brain Institute at the University of Pittsburgh.
And last but not least, Jerry Tannenbaum.
Jerry Tannenbaum, Professor Emeritus, Veterinary and Animal Ethics and Law, School of Veterinary Medicine, UC Davis.
Thank you so much, everybody. And now it's my great pleasure to go back to Dr. Larry Jurgensen from the NIH, who will have a presentation for us. Thank you so much, Dr. Jurgensen.
Thank you very much. And thank you for those rounds of introductions. It was really great to hear about the diversity of expertise and positions on this group. All right, so again, welcome to the public who is joining us today, wanting to make sure we provide some context on why NIH is engaging in this study and what we're actually, and the relevance of what we're trying to do here. So NIH, as you know, though, the committee that funds a wide array of research under the mission to support science and pursuit of knowledge. Again, the pursuit of knowledge, but again, to really work towards the biology and behavior of living systems, to really focus on extending human life and reducing illness and disability. We rely on a variety of model systems to do this and use a variety of techniques and technologies to be successful in this endeavor, including research with animal species, including non-human primates, to help us understand these systems and human physiology. I wanted to let you all know, for those who had not seen some of this information from a recent report, that NHPs really are a key model for specific types of biomedical research, in part because of the anatomical and the physiological and behavioral similarity to humans. They're used across all research stages. They're not only important for translational research, as we've seen in the COVID vaccines and therapeutics, immunosuppressive therapies, treatments for radiation syndrome and other translational avenues, but really important for basic research. Work with non-human primates has resulted in tremendous advances in our understanding of basic biology. Nobel Prizes for fundamental discoveries in neuroscience and other advances in reproductive health. And again, many of you representing those areas today. So they are a critical component of what we do here. However, I wanted to note that being said, NHPs have been estimated to only account for 0.5% of all animals used in current biomedical research studies. So these resources are prioritized and conserved as needed to really advance research aims as appropriate. And of course, we all know that use of animals in research is done with the highest standards of rigor and animal welfare. We at this agency prioritize the position that welfare and ethical considerations is paramount to funding the best science, and that they go hand in hand. Good study design includes good welfare, good environmental enrichment, and other aspects to really have the most reproducible and valid study results. I'm not going to go into the laws, policies, and regulations today because that's not the scope of what we're trying to do. But I wanted to make it clear to those who are joining us that there are extensive laws, policies, guidance, and more that NIH expects researchers to follow when conducting research with vertebrate animals, including NHPs. For example, as a condition of receiving funding from NIH, researchers and the IACUCs, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees, are required to ensure research involving care and use of animals is reviewed and determined to be both scientifically and ethically justifiable with the consideration of alternatives. Again, demonstrating why this is the most valuable research model for this study line of inquiry. Of course, recent major efforts at NIH go beyond these policies and more to ensure the responsible use of NHPs in biomedical research. I'm pleased to see some of you on the committee have been involved in some of these efforts, which is exciting to see you here again today. Some of these efforts have been working to ensure NHPs and all animal resources are used with the appropriate consideration of responsible use in terms of rigor, appropriate study model, ethical considerations, and more. For instance, we had an advisory committee meeting, working group that focused on rigor and research, focusing on enhancing rigor, transparency, and translatability in animal research. Again, all animal models, NHPs are a component of that. These efforts were working to help researchers inform the life cycle of a study, from study concept and design until after results are reported. We're also having conversations about how fostering rigorous research can integrate considerations of welfare and ethics to really enhance study design and translatability of findings. And then also thinking about resources and infrastructure. NHP models should depend on the appropriateness of the model and not be constrained or restricted by supply considerations. We also need to think about training, animal care staff, high quality housing needs, and more. So these are just some of the efforts in the past few years, really targeting into the responsible use of animals in research to enhance their application to our mission. This is why we welcome Congress's directive in the fiscal year 21 appropriations language that recognize the critical role non-human primates play in developing vaccines and treatments for public health threats, as well as in the basic research vein, and calls for NIH to commission this independent study that brings us here today. So I wanted to make sure you all saw the language from our congressional partners. Based on the review of the literature and other expert input, this committee will develop a report with its findings and conclusions related to the current and future roles of non-human primates in NIH-funded research. So scoping it to the NIH-funded research sphere. This will include the committee's findings related to gaps in research and resources, including those related to NHP availability and transportation needs. I want to make a few notes about this in terms of one, you'll note that it's around NIH funded research, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But also this is about your findings and conclusions. We are not asking for consensus recommendations. It's why we have such a diversity of expertise and disciplines here to tell us about these various areas as a findings and not the need to come to consensus recommendations. So I want to go into the actual charge to this committee based on the scoping of the language from the Hill. And it's divided into two parts with two subsections. So first is the current role of non-human primates in NIH-funded research. So despite the broad debate we've had about the use of NHPs in research, there has not really been an independent and comprehensive report about the areas of research where they're used. We're asking this committee to dive into the biomedical research areas in which non-human primates are used, whether it be for basic research, clinical research, or translational applications. It would also really valuable to hear from you all regarding descriptions about why non-human primates are the research model employed in these areas. The second part of this charge is around the demand and use of non-human primates. So I'd point out that in 2018, NIH did author this report on NHP resources to aid in determining the best strategy for the facilitation of NIH research programs. I'm sure many of you know that NIH does have research programs devoted to non-human primates, and to effectively plan for the future, this report was undertaken, analysis was undertaken. However, I think we've all seen with COVID, there is a new demand placed on non-human primates, which has created some global increase in demand and increasing supply pressures. So some of the consideration we would like you all to give is to augment this report about aspects such as considerations for study design, data quality and validity, and interpretation of outcomes regarding the new demand placed after the COVID pandemic. The second part of the charge that we are asking you all to take on is the future role of non-human primates in NIH-funded research. We look for the state of the science and the landscape analysis of the now, but where is the science taking us and what are the future needs going to be? Again, thinking through some of the supply issue, but where the areas of opportunities might be given the emerging science. So this in effect is a horizon scanning exercise. Again, different biomedical research disciplines may have more opportunity than others, and this would be helpful to know. But importantly, we really want to understand what areas will be ripe for future investments and where the scientific opportunity and public health needs might lie in terms of NHP research models. And then finally, along this vein and thinking about the future, we're also looking towards thinking about complementary approaches to catalyze discovery. So we're asking you all to outline some opportunities for what we're calling new approach methodologies to complement or reduce reliance on non-human primate research. We'd also like to hear more about strategies for increasing coordination and collaboration to make the most use of these resources, about how we can use these two non-human primate models and new approaches as complementary methods and tools to increase validity and reliability. Just a note here, the use of new approach is not really intended to limit your thinking to what is undiscovered or what technologies are so much on the horizon. For instance, advances in stem cells, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and even human models, frankly, could be included in this category. So we want to think about how we can complement the NHP resources with these other strategies for improving biomedical research models. Before I wrap, I did want to point out to you all that this is really of interest across the agency. I think it was apparent from one of my earlier slides in which I showed you just how important non-human primates are to advancing all aims of research here. There's broad interest in these issues across the agency, which you can see from who is co-sponsoring this study. This represents just a subset of the types of research that use non-human primate models in research. From the 2018 report that I referenced earlier, 19 of the 24 funding institutes and centers funded research using non-human primates from 2013 to 2017. So again, it's only 0.5% of all animals used in research, but it's a very valuable tool for those areas that are benefiting. So in summary, I wanted to just think about with you all how to embark upon this important task. Many questions rest on knowing precisely how non-human primates are currently used and where there will be need for non-human primates in the foreseeable future. Hopefully, this work has already been done by others, including other prior studies, which will help build a foundation to make this really large multi-part charge more feasible. But I look forward to seeing what you all are able to pull together. Thank you again for taking on this charge and lending your expertise to this important study. Again, we are extremely enthusiastic about receiving the findings. With that, I will stop sharing and take questions from the group.
Thank you, Dr. Jorgensen. Very much appreciated. I'll go ahead and ask a question of clarity and then ask the committee to start weighing in. You made reference to the number of institutes that have used NHPs in their portfolio, and you said 19, if I heard you correctly.
I believe that's correct, yes.
All right, that's actually quite an expensive, number of institutes. That's terrific to know. So with that, turn it over to my colleagues on the committee.
And can I add just to one thing that I did not touch upon my slides, but it was worth emphasizing, as I mentioned, the 19 out of 24. The original directive from our congressional partners asked this study to focus on some of the intramural research portfolio here at NIH. And because of this expansive investment and interest in non-human primates, we did extend the conversation from just our intramural portfolio to the extramural portfolio as well. Again, to get this holistic picture of the state of science and the future needs instead of a snapshot that might not actually inform, again, this broader portfolio.
Excellent. That actually was one of the questions that we intended to ask you, so you preempted that. That's wonderful. Committee members, if you could please raise your hand. John Quackenbush.
Lyric, thank you very much for providing some background for us. One of the things I think about a lot when I consider the charge given the committee is just understanding the scope of where NIH's current thinking is and sort of the broader regulatory community too, as to what types of experiments or what types of studies fundamentally require use of non-human primates versus those where it's an option, which may depend on much more fine-grained details about what the study is actually trying to do. So what are the places which are really, where human primates are really mandatory?
I mean, we've heard a lot from the community on the importance of being able to replicate primate physiology. Again, this translatability to human systems. So I think in that aspect, it has proven to be really, really important, again, to replicate the unique primate systems. However, again, there's been a lot of conversation with those in the non-human primate committee again about the basic fundamental biology that can be studied, where the circuits and the mechanisms are uniquely accessible through NHP systems. So I would not want to preclude what the committee wants to look at. I think it's important to make sure we're covering the spectrum and not at the expense of other areas where they provide valuable information.
But are there places where you see them as being essential?
Yes, and the essential, we try to stay away from the word needed or essential in our actual scoping, because that value is somewhat in the eye of the beholder. So the question was really is where are they used and for what reason, and why may they be uniquely suited for those questions? Again, to stay away from the value judgment as much as the landscape of understanding how they are used and why.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. This is a question that I think has surfaced multiple times related to how do you envision that the NIH will utilize the report, and the conclusions that will be emerging from the report? What do you see as a path forward?
I mean, some of the aspect is to explain to our stakeholders how they're used and why, again, the value they provide in multiple ways, but is also for thinking about the current use and the future use. I think during the COVID pandemic really showed us some areas in which resources needed to be reprioritized to be able to answer pressing public health emergencies. It came, though, at the expense of other research areas. And some of the aspect has to think about what does that mean? What are the implications of those decisions so that they are informed if ever we were faced with the situation again. I think I've also heard a lot of conversations about challenges in supply and demand and cost, frankly. So for the agency to be responsible for the stewardship over taxpayer funds, being able to effectively plan for the future and be able to prioritize these needs and think through how people are using them is going to be an important foundational document for us moving forward into the future.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I think, Jerry Tannenbaum.
Thank you, Dr. Jorgensen, for the wonderful presentation. I wonder if you could say a bit more about fundamental research and its relevance to what we'll be doing. It's mentioned both in the mission statement, of course, of NIH and in your presentation in terms of the percentage of NHP use that's used in fundamental or basic research. Can you say a bit more about that, about its relevance, for example, to need or necessity and so forth?
Absolutely. It's an excellent question. And as a person trained in neuroscience, I've had many conversations with the neuroscientific community and other communities like reproductive biology, where you really have ethical limitations to studying these fundamental circuitry and basic functions in human models. And the conversations, it's less about the translatability in terms of developing a new drug or treatment, but really understanding how physiology works before we can even move into the translational aspect. Being able to understand these systems and the way biology can be perturbated is of increasing interest. And as we are learning more about the genetic applications that can be done in marmosets and other animals, I think that is going to be something that is an increased demand and not a decreased in the future.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And of course, when we're talking about basic or fundamental research, predictability and necessity are concepts that become very cloudy sometimes.
Dr. Faslibes.
Thanks, Dr. Jorgensen. So my question also, I don't know what's going on with my camera for some reason. Let me turn it off. But the question I had also was, as you were talking about emerging technologies and like the pandemic and COVID-19, I'm trying to also understand in terms of NIH's components and thinking with regards to availability and being able to really be able to utilize these animals when we need them in emerging diseases as they come along. And I'm sure there's going to be a number of them coming along, and how we balance what we need with regards to the availability of these animals.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And again, the hope is some of this report in terms of providing, again, the findings of the state of science and the anticipation of where we are going is really allow us to have an informed look at how they are being used to make these conversations more evidence-based as we move into the future. I think the hope is to never have to make these tough choices, but in a public health emergency, we found that lots of conversations needed to be had. So I think having this landscape analysis and really thinking about who needs these resources and what are the models and mechanisms. And again, this is outside my scope as a policy director, but you obviously, those of you working in this field know the Office of Research Infrastructure and Primate centers and others think about these models as well. So hopefully it will not be just a resource for NIH, but for other of those that are really maintaining these colonies and trying to supply their institutions for their important research questions. So I'm hoping, again, this will be a really, really foundational resource for the community as a whole.
Dr. Strix.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. My question is how we can be more impactful than prior committees. I think the 2018 report was fairly comprehensive, and it seems to me that some of these questions are being re-asked. And particularly the notion about the importance of non-human primate research. You list all of the neurologic and neuropsychiatric and vision institutes. And in some respects, the burden of neurologic disease is just remarkable. And we're going to face a tsunami of long COVID. And we're already facing a tsunami of Alzheimer's disease. And so the issue of creating the opportunity for discovery of new treatments and cures in these diseases, to those of us in the field seems obvious, but it's clear that we're not making this case well enough so that Congress is asking this question again. And so really what I'm interested in knowing is how can we provide you with the information that will be more impactful than prior reports?
Thank you for this question. And from where I sit, I am often said these two things. One, people who work with animals say there's no way we'll ever replace animal models. They're essential. And then we hear animal models are terrible models for human disease and treatments, and they tell us nothing. And people who are not steeped in this conversation say these are inconsistent statements, when I actually think at some level they are true. Animal models provide very interesting insights, provide us with directions. They are essential and invaluable, and they are model systems. They are limited because they are not humans, and these things can be true. The question is, how do we bridge this conversation that models are just that, models of things, and their scale-up applicability to translation and other components. So I think part of saying this message is being clear why these messages are not actually inconsistent and both true and almost the inverse. But the second component is having the state of the science that is not arguing about the value. Again, as we mentioned, to not have the value judgment, but as where there are opportunities and where there are challenges. So for me, having a report that has the ground truth of where there really is opportunity and maybe where there's not opportunity, where something that's not a document that just says they are essential for everything all the time. Maybe there are areas where they are not, or maybe where there's areas where there should be prioritized, that show a balanced and thoughtful report about how this can really be used. And so that's where I think some of the value in what you produce can be, in terms of actually not arguing about the value, but arguing about the actual science and evidence that it creates.
Would it be fair to say then, based on that response that you provided, that some degree of specificity, to the extent that would be reasonable, would be a welcome addition to the report?
I believe so. I believe we are really looking to you all as the experts in the fields of where there's real opportunity and where they're completely making science easier, more replicatable, more translatable, basic discoveries more easy to be made, and where there are the limitations. It doesn't mean that the model isn't value, but here's what it can tell you, and here's what it cannot tell you, and here's where you need a complementary approach to be able to augment the findings from these models to really catalyze that difference.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? I believe that maybe to the last point that you made, perhaps some sense on the degree to which alternative models, complementary models, would be appropriate for discussion. It would seem to be, based on what you said, that as we identify limitations, if you would, for NHPs, and then maybe taking advantage of technological advances and new methodologies that would be complementary and probably even help fill the gap for some of those, would be appropriate for inclusion in the report. Would you agree to that?
That is absolutely what we are looking for, is where are these opportunities to complement non-human primate research models, or areas where new approaches might actually provide more insight and are complemented by non-human primate models to the reverse, and where those areas of opportunity would be really, really welcome by the agency.
Yeah, and I think that actually dovetails really well, Peter, with the question that you asked about how is it that the impact of our report could be enhanced, relative to future or past reports. I think that Stephen Barron has a question. So, Stephen.
Yeah, so maybe it's just more of a comment than a question. So I really appreciate, mentioning about, where these models are working, where the models are not working, and complementary models like alternatives and etc. But I think also there's opportunity for us, is there an opportunity to extract more information from the NHPs with novel technologies, and provide us with actionable insight from the models that we're already working with. And something I mentioned earlier is the digital biomarkers. So just like we monitor patients, where we bring the trials to the patients, do that at home, we can monitor them 24/7 and extract data that way. There's potential opportunity here with non-human primates, with the models that we're using, incorporating the type of monitoring, and then extracting more information from the models that we already are using or are going to use anyhow.
I think that's an excellent comment or point to be made, in terms of, as we have new technologies coming online, that is shaping our future, and that is new opportunities to be able to gather new information and new data from the non-human primate models that actually complement other avenues. So I think that's definitely within scope.
Okay. So Adam, I believe that we have covered, I think, all of the questions that we had initially identified. Am I correct in making that statement, or do we have any areas in those questions that we did not address?
No, I think that you covered all of the key aspects that the committee wanted to make sure were addressed today.
So are there any additional questions or comments that anybody else would like to make? We've got Dr. Jorgensen's brain here, so we need to take advantage of it. And looks like we've got Mark Klein with a question. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, thank you for that overview, Dr. Jorgensen. Could you comment on the scope of our task with respect to how we should view FDA approval studies, or impact on FDA approval studies? For example, GLP studies that are done under the in order to seek drug approval.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, obviously, this comes into the different types of research that's being conducted, and model systems are required for FDA approval. And some of the conversation about new approaches, unless those are put into the system for approval. So I think those are some of the conversations that can be touched on in terms of the reason why some of these models may not be able to be replaced and the value they bring. But I leave it to the committee to work through some of that in terms of, again, the limitations and the necessity, using the word that I'm asking you not to use, for these models in the system.
Very good.
I would also just like to comment, one of the thoughts after speaking with you all, I'm not sure if I made it really clear, is that we are really looking forward to hearing from you as experts across different domains, different disciplines, different types of research, to really put down your ideas and knowledge of the state of the science and of the landscape as this, again, evidence-based conversation about how they're being used and these real limitations and opportunities. We have no predetermined outcome, and I appreciate the conflict of interest statement that was read in the beginning, because that really is the case here. We are looking at you as the experts to help shape the future thinking here. So I wanted to make sure that was stated as well.
Thank you. Chris Abbey. I think you're muted, Chris. There you go.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jorgens, for your statement of charge, really. We appreciate it. Although the pharmaceutical industry is not a sponsor, more primates are used in pharmaceutical research by probably 3 times as many primates. That greatly impacts the availability of primates for NIH-sponsored research. How should our committee view pharmaceutical research with respect to the impact on the use of primates in biomedical research? Because certainly that impacts NIH grant recipients.
Thank you for that question. It was one that was heavily debated in thinking about the scope and the charge and information in terms of, again, we are not the only players in the research game. And to your point, the pharmaceutical and biological industry use non-human primates very heavily. So I think while we are not asking you to conduct a landscape analysis of private sector use, that's outside of the task, I do think it is fair in terms of supply and demand issues to talk about constraints in the system that need to be factored in. It would be short-sighted to pretend that this was not a factor affecting the system. And I think that this committee can feel within scope to acknowledge that that is an additional component that needs to be considered in any planning purposes.
All right, Dr. Metcalf, Patty, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Jurgensen. That was a very excellent presentation on what our scope of charge is, and very helpful. In reflecting on the conversation that we had prior to meeting today as a committee, and also on our statement of task, the scope is very broad. And we're being cautioned to keep away from making value judgments, but we might make inherent value judgments in the amount of effort that we place on different parts of the scope. So I'd be very curious if the NIH has any guidance for us in terms of percentage of effort that they want us to devote to the different parts of the statement of task. Specifically, should we be approaching this from the avenue first of looking at the non-human primate models, or should we be approaching it from the avenue first of looking at the new approach methodologies? Does the NIH have a preference as to how we do this?
That is an excellent question. Interestingly, one had not thought of before. And so I was thinking through it in my head, which you see my eyes go up when I'm thinking. I do not think that NIH has a preference in terms of which one you address first. I think that the best guidance I can give is thinking through the NIH mission, that we are less interested in prioritizing the model per se as much as we are prioritizing the science we hope to fund, the research we aim to support, and what models best make that achievable, and where there are limits and where there, again, are opportunities. So I don't think there's a specificity in the order of the task, and I would probably encourage you all to think about, again, what we are trying to achieve in terms of science and how to get there.
Any additional comments or questions? We still have a bit of time. And following this discussion with Dr. Jorgensen, we will take questions from the public on the online questions, which I think have begun to percolate. But I don't want to cut this short unless we absolutely feel that we got what we needed. We will have other public open sessions in the future, and to the extent that some of these questions can be aired again, we certainly can take advantage of that opportunity. I think that your presentation was highly informative and very, very helpful in helping us granulate somewhat, the written statement of task. It makes the point that nothing really beats an interaction, that's in our case virtual, but nonetheless very, very helpful, in adding perspective and enabling us to better understand what we can do to help NIH and your stakeholders address the issues. And so we're very thankful to you for your time and clarity of presentation. And I see that Andy has his hand up. So before I say my last thank you, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Oh, well, I just wanted to also say thank you to Lyric for coming and making that wonderful presentation and answering questions today. And also wanted to make it clear to the committee that this isn't the last chance that you'll have to talk with Lyric. And believe me, there will be questions about the scope and the task and where the boundaries are and where we should be, or where you should be as a committee, focusing your energies, et cetera, and questions about what this means and that means, and could we go here and there, kind of thing. So that kind of thing will come up in the future, and I'm sure that Lyric will answer our emails and our phone calls if we reach out to her. So I just wanted to make it clear to the committee that this is not, the only opportunity we'll have to talk with her about that, and also just to say thank you very much again for her coming today. And I guess, can we just go to the public questions at this point?
Yeah, I believe so. Dr. Jorgensen, thank you so much. We'll be in touch again, as needed later on. Very helpful. So, Autumn, how should we navigate the public questions? I see some in the chat and then some in the question and answer session. So your input could be helpful here.
I think it would just be the ones that are in the the Q&A box.
Okay.
Those are the questions that are coming from the audience. I don't know if you can see the ones in the open, but I'm happy to also address them to the committee if that would be easier.
Are we able to keep Lyric with us for this part of the session? Lyric, are you available? Can you stay?
I am available. I will take direction from the committee if it's something you would like to turn to me, or if you would like to keep it. I want to make sure it is an independent commission study, and we'll defer to you all for whether or not you let me participate.
Terrific. And we've got, plenty of people that would know when it's appropriate and when it's not. So that's really wonderful. So I'm seeing 3 questions in the question and answer box. And so the first one is from Kirk Leach. I'm going to go ahead and read it. It says, hi, my name is Kirk Leach. I'm the executive director of the European Animal Research Association. Given there's currently a global shortage of NHPs, essentially due to China's export ban, do you see this study helping to convince the U.S. administration that this threat to research needs a political response? I'm not sure that that is a question the committee's ready to answer at this point in time. But Autumn, I'll ask for your guidance on that.
Yeah, I think at this time we're primarily looking for questions about the charge to the committee. Obviously, the committee is just getting underway and hasn't had a chance yet to really get the information gathering process of the study going. And so I think certainly the issue of availability was called out in the statement of task, primate availability, and the committee will be looking at the challenges related to primate availability.
All right. Lisa Jones Engel asked, Dr. Strick asked how this committee can be more impactful than prior committees. In 2011, a committee determined that chimpanzees, our closest primate relatives, had consistently failed to provide meaningful advances in human health. How much more impactful can this current monkey committee expect to be? My answer to that question, and then I'll ask Dr. Strick to comment as well, would be science continues to evolve all the time. And I think as a function of that evolution of science and technology is our ability to answer questions that in the past might have been difficult to answer, but that could then be answered, in the advent of new discoveries and new advances. And so when you re-engage in things that did not yield a lot of product, in the past, actually that's not total, it's not a waste of time, because as that evolution takes place, obviously the ability to give the answers continue to change and evolve. Dr. Strick, do you want to comment, since the impact question came from you?
Well, I think your answer deals with it well.
All right. Next question came from Kay Kinderis. Will ethical considerations be considered? And my answer to that is, of course. Autumn, do you want to elaborate on that?
I don't really have anything specific to add, except that I think that the statement of task really lays out the charge that is before the committee. There's not explicit reference to ethical issues related to use on primates, but I'll ask Dr. Jorgensen if she'd like to add anything regarding that issue of scope.
Thanks so much, Autumn. We do recognize, and in terms of you saw that earlier in the presentation, and again, some of you were at this workshop, that there are ethical questions that can be answered in terms of appropriate research model. And we had this workshop on, how does housing and other treatment of animals, some might call that welfare, some call it ethics, and it's that beautiful intersection of terms of appropriateness for the research study design. So if you're studying some sort of psychiatric conditions, making sure that there's enrichment that replicates the environment needed to develop those systems is really important. So there are conversations about ethics in terms of study design, and truthfully at the intersection of rigorous research. And I does believe that conducting rigorous research studies and the appropriateness of the model, the study, the results are all essential components. So I think ethics is interwoven in multiple aspects of the charge. And I envision that, and again, the opportunities and the limitations of Nhp models have some inherent ethics about those kind of studies being conducted in terms of the design.
Yeah, excellent answer. I think, the interdependence of ethics and scientific appropriateness of any study go hand in hand. In fact, in the absence of ethical conduct, you almost invalidate the appropriateness and the justification for the scientific study itself. So they go together. We have the next question is from Kathleen Conley, who asks, will the committee be addressing limitations of NHP models? And as noted in Dr. Jorgensen's presentation, we will be tackling those and looking at ways that improvements can be made and that complementary approaches can be addressed. The next question is from Catherine Kreide, who asks, given the limited supply of NHPs, will the committee be exploring existing disaster readiness and or emergency management planning at animal research facilities to help safeguard the animals? We have currently an ongoing research underway. Again, this is a question that we probably need to answer a bit down the road since the committee is just now getting started, but excellent point that's been made. John Dennis asks, someone was asking about FDA needs for NHP studies. Although I can't speak on behalf of FDA, no one generalized an answer because it is very product specific. Small molecules, new chemical entities, biologics, and vaccines are quite different with diverse questions that reviewers may want to be answered. Sometimes involve potential use of NHPs. Sponsors should always communicate with FDA in advance before setting up pivotal experiments when there are questions about the need for NHP studies and possible use of alternatives. So more a statement of fact. And then Lisa Jones-Engel, I think, has a new question that says, how will the committee navigate and or access the data given that it has no primatologists? That show that despite the less than 1% of monkeys used in biomedical research, will primate populations in Asia have crashed. The consequences of the extraction of primates from these habitat countries has been catastrophic. More a statement than a question, and so I'll leave it at that. And I believe that is, there's one new one from Joe Newsome. Will methodologies for prioritizing within and across disciplines funding and access to these limited resources be considered by the committee? That has been part of what we expect to be able to do. So appreciate your question and encouragement in that particular regard.
And can I just, that issue of prioritization, I thought that might be actually a good one to also discuss with NIH while we have them here. The committee has been asked to conduct this landscape analysis looking at the current role for and future needs for non-human primates. And I just would be interested in Lyric's input on this issue of prioritizing and whether NIH is interested in any kind of prioritization of needs, or if this is meant to be more of a descriptive landscape analysis.
Thank you so much for the question, Autumn. As mentioned earlier, we are not looking for a consensus study, which does create some different constraints. We were very adamant of the importance of having people who work with non-human primate models being on this group. That does cause, there's inherent conflicts of having studies making prioritizations about which areas of funding are most valuable. So I think the goal here was really to have you all as experts talking about how they are used, where is the future going, and the limitations, and less of a value base on which fields are more important in quotations, because that's a different kind of study. So the landscape analysis is more towards the terms of what we are looking for.
Thank you, Lyric.
Excellent. So there's no more questions and answers. And I think that we have asked all the questions that we needed to ask from Dr. Jorgensen. So Autumn, should we break and resume at 1:45 Eastern time?
Yeah, we can break until 1:45. I do just want to note that there will be future public meetings with additional opportunities for public comment on the study. And so this is not the last opportunity, but we did want to thank those who provided questions today.
Yes, and before we go, obviously we'd like to thank the NIH and Dr. Jorgensen for taking the time to speak with the committee. This has been extremely helpful. And of course, we appreciate the sponsorship of the study because it's obviously raising important questions for the future of the nation and our ability to be responsive to the scientific and medical needs that might come up in the future. I'd like to thank the public that joined us during this open session. Of course, appreciate the questions and the comments provided. I think they always add perspective to the challenge and the task at hand. And as Autumn noted, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for other public sessions and input to be provided by you. I'd like to remind members of the public that any feedback or materials that they wish to share with the committee can be submitted through the project website and will be made publicly available through the project public access file. This is required by the academies to comply with Section 15 of the Federal Advisory Committee Act rules. And without further ado, I will call the open session to a close and ask committee members to remain logged in so that you avoid any chances that connectivity gets disrupted. So please stay on. Of course, you can mute yourselves and stop your cameras, but stay on and enjoy the time that you have before we resume at 1:45 Eastern time. And be prompt in coming back since that will be a closed session where we will be debriefing on a number of issues that we've discussed so far. So thank you again to all the participants and especially to Dr. Jorgensen and the public. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Lyric.